employer, but all it said was that I shouldn't return to the office until the situation improved. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the organizers as well. I am at a place where my words have run dry, so I'm just gonna let the text speak. I will read first from Yannis Ritsos, who's a Greek poet. These are my translations with Edmund Keeley, and this is from Diaries of Exile. They are poems that he wrote when he was in internal exile in Greece for his leftist activity and beliefs, basically in a concentration camp for leftists. So I'm just gonna read, you can see how many short poems. November 25. Our people are far away. The letters are few. The flies are dying of cold. We watch them fall to the ground. Later, we sweep them up. December 24th. Each morning, flocks of wild geese head south. We watch them unmoving. You get tired of looking up. Soon enough, we lower our heads. December 29th. I enter the forest. Deeper in is the sleeping lion. I walk softly, a bird on my shoulder. January 5th. The 3 lighted windows in the closed-up house. Was it ours once? Everything is like the light we miss. January 18th. Our house, you said. Which house? Our house is over there, with the single bed, with the broom, with the unsuspecting poems, not yet torn. January 26th. I want to compare a cloud to a deer. I can't. Over time, the good lies grow few. These are not all the same year. These are from multiple years of incarceration. May 30th. The soldiers on the low wall, unshaven, a sorrow yawns in their eyes. They listen to the loudspeakers, to the sea. They don't hear a thing. Perhaps they would like to forget. At sunset, they go slowly to the gully to do their business. As they button up their pants, the new moon catches their eye. The world could have been beautiful. And this is the last poem. June 1st. In the morning, the horizon is the whitewashed facade of an orphanage. In the evening, it hangs from the cripple's crutches like an island sock full of holes. At night, those killed gather together under the stones, with some notes in their cigarette packs, with some densely scribbled scraps of paper in their shoes, with some illicit stars in their eyes. Above them, the sky grows larger and deeper, never tires. Concentration camp, Makaronisos, 1950. And now I will read 2 poems by Najwan Darwish in Karim Abu Zaid's translation. Sorry, I don't have a marker for that one, so I'm going to remember it's on page 49. First, I'm going to read a poem from the forthcoming volume, No One Will Know You Tomorrow, which will be released in just a few weeks. And I thank Karim for allowing me to read this, for giving me the poem so that I could read it, for making it available, and for all the work that he's doing in translating these remarkable poems. A short story about the closing of the sea. When you turn down that street at the city's edge, the one that leads to the camp, if you see children leaving that school that resembles a prison, If you see 7 of them standing there on the threshold of silence, watching, if you see a slender child whose eyes are gleaming with all the world's promises, you'll have found my friend Taysir. His family has a country that was stolen in broad daylight, and you can see the vigilance of its birds in his anxious eyes. The cement houses, the memories of tin sheets, the voices that were fearful of the occupying army's transceivers through the long weeks of curfew. None of this has taken the slightest spark from his eyes. He saw the sea once, and nothing can convince him he won't see it again. When the curfew's lifted, we'll take you to the sea. That's how they used to comfort him. And when the curfew finally was lifted one evening, they said, "The sea's closed now, go to sleep." He didn't sleep that night. He imagined an old man who closed the sea by lowering a massive tin sheet that stretched from the star on the horizon to the sand on the shore. The man secured it with a huge padlock, then went back to his home. The padlock was larger than the one on Taysir's father's shop on Omar Mukhtar Street. When you walk down that street at the city's edge, the one that leads to the camp, if you see 2 eyes gleaming with all the world's promises, ask them, I beg you, if the Gaza Sea has opened yet, or if it's still closed. And I'll read just one more very short poem from this volume, Nothing More to Lose. Did I say 49? Yes. Okay. It's called, I found it, thank you. It's called In the Trap. The mouse in the trap says, history is not on my side. The reptiles are all agents of men, and all mankind is against me, and reality too is against me. Yet despite all this, I have faith my progeny will prevail. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Nicholas Glastonbury. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I am a translator of Turkish and Kurdish literature. Thank you to the organizers for making this happen. Thank you to PCRF for the work that they do. If you have a chance and if you're able, please do also consider donating to this crowdfunding campaign for a young writer from Gaza. I am going to read an excerpt of a forthcoming translation of mine. It's a Kurdish novel called The Competition of Unfinished Stories. It is by the Kurmanji Kurdish writer and artist Şener Özmen. I believe it's the first Kurmanji Kurdish novel to be appearing in English, which is pretty cool. The novel is forthcoming from Sandorf Passage, and it is a sort of madcap black comedy that grapples with the psychic violence of life under Turkish colonial occupation. So its protagonist, Sertaç Karan, is an atheist who teaches Arabic calligraphy at a religious school. He's also an aspiring writer, and as the novel goes on, the stories that he tries and fails to write become sort of schizoid versions of himself that haunt the main narrative. So I'm going to read an excerpt from near the end. Sertaç Karan arrives from Kurdistan at the sort of tail end of the Dirty War, and he is arriving to Germany for a writer's residency, which is put on by a humanitarian literary organization. He struggles with the cognitive dissonance of life in Germany, with his fetishization as a writer from the quote-unquote war-torn Middle East, and with the kind of careless European liberalism that is predicated upon turning a blind eye to their complicity in violence elsewhere. Okay. That evening, the director of the Foundation for Defeated Writers, Frau Müller, collected Sertaç Karan, aka Civilized Sertaç, and his 2 overstuffed suitcases from the Dusseldorf airport and drove him to the Münster city center and from there to the Diakonissenmutterhaus guest house, where he would be staying for his 6-week residency. Before she left, she handed him an envelope containing exactly 6,000 euro. It was his stipend, and asked him to count it out to make sure that there had been no mistake with the math. But not wanting to count out those crisp new euro bills one by one in front of her, he used his broken English to thank Frau Muller for everything. When Frau Muller left, he locked the door and made that stack of bills rain on his bed and then flung himself on top. At first, he couldn't believe that he was there in Münster, in a tiny room in this enormous guest house. Then, after a very long shower and a leisurely cigarette, intentionally disregarding the sign in the room prohibiting smoking, he passed out, sleeping soundly on his bed of euros. 33 days later, 33 days since his arrival in Münster, Sertac Karan, aka Fading Star Sertac, hadn't written a single word. Sertac Karan, aka Beyond His Control Sertac, would soon be saved altogether from that room and from that guest house, but also saved from the croaking frogs and the tolling bells, from that long and dingy corridor of the guest house, and from that district and from that street. Sertac Karan, aka most likely to commit suicide Sertac, had, over the course of 33 days, felt like putting a single bullet in his brain for every single day he spent in that guest house. He felt like he had been locked away and forgotten in some dark prison, his hands and feet bound with the sturdiest of chains and all of his human rights violated. He hadn't wanted to come to Münster in the first place, to settle into that guest house, but he had been coerced under threat of violence. They demanded a story from him, also under threat of violence, and they immiserated him in helplessness, in womanlessness, in uneventfulness, in the silence of the nights, the boundless solitude, the monotonous living, in that deaf country, that yellow color, that inviting repose that exerts its tyrannical dominion over people and places, in the clouds, in the rain, in everything that reminds him that he is human, and especially in the system of things, that drab and lifeless system, that suffocating system, that oppressive German system, that system that proclaims, I am the system, the insatiable system with whose rope one of these defeated knights he would surely hang himself. Whereas the Germans at the foundation supposed that Sertac Karan, aka Miserable Sertac, was simply still in a state of shock, having come from the grasp of death to the cradle of life, from hell to heaven, that Sertac Karan, aka Run Ragged Sertac, was merely under the spell of the euros handed to him in a sealed envelope, that he was simply overwhelmed with surprise but flying high, overcome with joy like some Kurdish bird freed from its cage, utterly astonished by democracy, which he had never before seen, and by freedom so unbridled that villages in his own country would be razed for even the briefest taste of it. A few days earlier, he chanced upon a bar while on a walk. He went in the afternoon and drank until the middle of the night. It had taken him less than 10 minutes walking at his normal pace to get to the street it was on, and as the hours passed, a number of blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls arrived, brightening up the dark and desolation of the tiny bar, their revelry ensconcing itself in his stomach alongside his giant beer and his tequila. He did the same thing again tonight. He quickly changed into a long-sleeved black t-shirt, a pair of black pants, and left the guest house, which he had renamed Boredom Central, bringing with him 200 euros and, of course, his map, his passport, and his favorite book by Ereb Shemilov. Sertac Karan, aka A Good Egg Sertac, asked the bartender, a tall, sturdy girl, for a pint of dark beer, and he took Ereb Shemilov's novel Shivani Kurmanja, aka The Kurdish Shepherd, out of his bag and laid it out on the bar with tremendous care like he was handling a Quran, and he laughed as he said to himself, a stout beer and Shivani Kurmanja. The beer came quickly, but before he took his first sip, he lit a cigarette and turned his ear to the sweet, pleasant music. The girl had tried to change the music upon his arrival, but he stopped her. Let this play. I love jazz. He turned his focus to a page in the novel. It wasn't really all that cool out, but the occasional breeze would blow in suddenly as the rain began sprinkling down. Apart from an old drunk man in the corner, there was no other customer at this hour. After she finished her tasks, the bartender came with a cocktail, sat down beside Sertac Karan, aka Completely Unexpected Sertac, and asked him what book he was reading. He attempted, as best he could in his limited English, to say something about the Kurdish writer Ereb Shemilov, talking about, for instance, his illness. She wasn't from here. She had come from Ukraine, from the city of Volodymyr to the city of Köln. She spent 2 years in Köln. She spoke English, and in no time at all got German under her belt too. She worked various jobs to get by during her years in Köln, and now she was enrolled at the Münster Kunstakademie, where she was studying classical art history, but she had given up hope of ever graduating. In her opinion, Münster was the very embodiment of existential terror and dread. As if to prove her point, she brought up the movie The Truman Show as an example. Yes, Sertac Karan, aka Utterly Breathless Sertac, had seen it, and not just once or twice. Münster was the world's largest insane asylum. So why had he chosen Münster? Why not Berlin? Sertac Karan, aka Please Go On, Sertac, explained from beginning to end the ordeal of his choosing a city. Münster hadn't been his preference. He hadn't requested it, but the people who extended him the invitation to Münster had nonetheless done so with good intentions. He was from the city of Ahmed. Had she ever heard of Ahmed? Oh, he was from a city of unending chaos and clamor, a city he loved and hated, a tough, gritty, difficult, hostile city full of violence. From a city of washed corpses and corpse washers, from a city of arrogance, from a city where the most vicious brutality takes place, which is why the Germans sent him straight to Münster, to wrap his wounds, to heal his spirit, to revitalize him completely. They hadn't considered that the more he asked of Münster, the more it responded in kind with its lethal malaise. The girl wasn't wrong after all. Münster really was a lethal place for someone like him, a place for an anonymous death, a place for dying entirely lonely and entirely alone, because apart from the croaking of the frogs and the cheeping of the birds and the tolling of the bells and the sudden claps of thunder, there was no other sound of life. Had they plugged his ears with wax? Had he gone deaf? Why couldn't he hear? Sertac Karan, aka Pleasant Conversation Sertac, had embarked on this insane monologue and forgotten about the girl altogether. Yes, he had come from Ahmed, where there were a few words only ever spoken there, a few political words that meant absolutely nothing anywhere else except Ahmed. Was it possible, as in Ahmed, to be arrested in Münster and to rot in prison for no reason? What motherfucker was wasting away in there right now, and on what grounds? What was the mayor of Münster doing right this second? Did Münster have that kind of collective known as crowds? Who sacrificed themselves here, and for what? And most important of all, why is our blood so cheap? Which was when the girl took her leave, needing to tend another customer. Perhaps she was unsettled by his silence, but had he really been silent? His glass was empty, and he had to piss something bad. He stepped outside as he grappled with his own dark thoughts and pissed underneath the condom-matic in the darkness, and he let out a fart that sounded like a braying donkey, and then he laughed at the state he was in. Standing in front of the window in that drab, rainy city, in this country which was home to an ideology that had once ground millions of people to dust, he lit a cigarette. In moments like these, cigarettes were his lifesaver. They really were saving his life. Cigarettes were medicine. And Sertac Karan, aka Oppressed Sertac, lingered on the dreams and the reveries he once had for this life, and he longed and longed for his colonized city. Thank you.
I've been to that city. Wait. I don't know. Yes, and that bar. Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Jessica Hagedorn, and I'm very glad to be here tonight with all of you. And I'm going to read a prayer which ends my novel, Dog Eaters. The The new copy is just out. And then a poem. This new book by Mossab Abu Toha, Forest of Noise. And I found a poem that really spoke to me because it's like speaking to the piece I'm going to read from my book. So two ghosts speaking to each other. And I'll end with his poem, of course. Okay. That was funny. You can fit a lot in your phone. I could never read from my phone. Oh my God. I was like, whoa. Okay, so this ends the novel, Dog Eaters, and it's a prayer. It's a prayer I wrote sort of reclaiming a prayer I grew up with, the Our Father, into Our Mother. And that's it. Our Mother who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Thy will not be done, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom never came. You who have been defiled, belittled, and diminished. Our Blessed Virgin Mary of most precious blood, menstrual, ephemeral, carnal, eternal. Rosa Mystica, Black Virgin of rhinestone and velvet mystery, Madonna of volcanoes and violence. Your eye burns through the palm of my outstretched hand, eye glowing with heavenly flames, one single eye watching over me on earth as it is in heaven. Damn it, Mother dear. There are serpents in your garden, licking your ears with forked tongues, poisoning your already damaged heart. I am suffocated by my impotent rage. My eyes are blinded by cataracts blue as your miraculous robes. I listen intently for snatches of melody, the piercing, high-pitched wail of your song of terror. Hear clues to your ghostly presence in the lingering trail of your deadly perfume. Wild roses and plumeria, the dizzying fragrance of damas de noche, the rotting bouquets of wilted zampaguita flowers you cradle in your arms. I would curse you. In Waray, Ilocano, Tagalog, Spanish, English, Portuguese, and Mandarin, I would curse you, but I choose to love you instead. Amo, amas, amat, amant. Give us this day our daily bread. Our Mother who art, what have those bastards gone and done now? Your eyes are veiled, clouded by tears, veiled but never blinded. Dazzle us with your pity. Let the scars tattooed on your face be a reminder of your perennial sorrow. Kyrie eleison, Lamb of God, damn it, who taketh away the sins of the world. My dim eyes scan the shadows in vain. Ave Maria, full of grace, ite missa est. Manila, I was born here. Manila, I will die here. Tantum ergo sacramentum. So the daughters say, so the sons seek out miracles, so the men will not live to see the light. Your long monkey toes grip the hairy coconuts strewn at your feet, virgin with one ear pierced by a thorn. Stigmata of mercy, the blood of a slain rooster spouts from the open palms of your monkey hands. Stigmata of beautiful suffering and insane endurance. Dolores, dolorosa. Spilled blood of innocence dead by the bullet, the dagger, the arrow, dead by the slingshot of polished stones, dead by grenades, hunger and thirst, dead by profound longing and profound despair. Spilled blood of ignited flesh, exploded flesh, radiated flesh. Spilled blood of forbidden knowledge. Bless us, Mother, for we have sinned. Our Mother who art in heaven, forgive us our sins. Our Lady of most precious blood, wild dogs, hyenas, jackals, coyotes, and wolves. Our Lady of panthers and jaguars, Our Lady of cobras, mournful lizards, lost souls, and radio melodramas. Give us this day. Our Lady of typhoons, deliver us from evil. Forgive us our sins, but not theirs. Ave Maria, Mother of revenge, the Lord was never with you. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed are the fruits of thy womb, guavas, mangoes, santol, mangosteen, durian, now and forever, world without end, now and forever. And now Mossab. Obit. To the shadow I had left alone before I crossed the border, my shadow that stayed lonely and hid in the dark of the night, freezing where it was, never needing a visa. To my shadow that's been waiting for my return, homeless, except when I was walking by its side in the summer light. To my shadow that wishes to go to school with the children of morning, but couldn't fit through the classroom doors. To my shadow that has caught cold now, that's been sneezing and coughing, no one there saying to it, God bless. To my shadow that's been crushed by cars and vans, its chest pierced by shrapnel and bullets, flying with no wings. My shadow that no one's attending to, bleeding black blood through its memory, now and forever. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Pierre Joris, poet and translator, and I want to thank, of course, our organizers for the occasion, which I much appreciate having been invited to. Now, as witness to these, our dark, very dark times, let me open with a poem by Paul Celan in my translation, addressing that vengeful Godhead common to our three monotheistic disaster modes. Tenebrae, we are near, Lord, near and graspable, grasped already, Lord, clawed into each other, as if each of our bodies was your body, Lord. Pray, Lord, pray to us, we are near. Wind bent, we went there. We went there to bend down over crater and mar. To the trough we went, Lord. It was blood. It was what you spilt, Lord. It shone. It cast your image into our eyes, Lord. Eyes and mouth gaped so open and empty, Lord. We have drunk, Lord, the blood and the image in the blood, Lord. Pray, Lord, we are near. In January 1934, 2 months after his bar mitzvah in his hometown of Chernobyl, which is now in the Ukraine, I check on it to see if the Russians have managed to bomb it or not. 2 months after his bar mitzvah, the 14-year-old Paul Celan wrote to his aunt Minna, who had recently emigrated to Palestine. He explained why he had been ranked second in class and not first, by citing his, quote, belonging to the Jewish branch of the Semitic race. The other branch is, of course, the Arab branch, something all too often forgotten here and elsewhere, which makes the accusations of anti-Semitism all the way to today more complex than both extremist simplifications thereof. The killing has to stop on both sides. Hamas is a religious terrorist organization put and kept in power and financed by Netanyahu's right-wing fascistoid government in cahoots with Arab Peninsula government and US, i.e. our tax money. This, like all previous such wars in Palestine and elsewhere in the world, will make, among those lucky enough to survive, the bombings and killings for hundreds of thousands, in fact millions of refugees, a state most Palestinians have known since the 1948 Nakba. Here a poem of mine that tries to address that condition via refugees from an other part of the world. Sudanese saying, one of the non-bourgeois of Calais, on one of the last days of the great emptying, i.e. the shameless hiding of the eyesore Calais refugee camps called the jungle, where jungle is a translation of Pashto Zangal, meaning forest. One of these non-bourgeois of Calais reported a Sudanese saying to object to the refugees' dispersal, a saying that says, solidarity alleviates pain. And this is how it goes. If we die all together, death is a feast. And here are three poems by Palestinian writers. The first by Hiba Abu Nada, translated by Huda Fakhreddin. Hiba Abu Nada was killed at age 32 in her hometown of Gaza by an Israeli airstrike on October 20th, 2023. Not just passing. Yesterday, a star said to the little light in my heart, we are not just transients passing. Do not die. Beneath this glow, some wanderers go on walking. You were first created out of love, so carry nothing but love to those who are trembling. One day, all gardens sprouted from our names, from what remained of hearts yearning. And since it came of age, this ancient language has taught us how to heal others with our longing, how to be a heavenly scent to relax their tightening lungs, a welcome sigh, a gasp of oxygen. Softly we pass over wounds like purposeful gauze, a hint of relief, an aspirin. A little light in me, don't die. Oh, little light in me, don't die, even if all the galaxies of the world close in. Oh, little light in me, say, enter my heart in peace. All of you, come in. The next two are by Palestinian poet and memoirist Fadwa Tuqan, 1917 to 2003. The first one, translated from the Arabic by Tanya Tamiri Nasir and Christopher Millis. Longing inspired by the law of gravity. Time's out and I'm home alone with the shadow I cast. Gone is the law of the universe, scattered by frivolous fate. Nothing to hold down my things, nothing to weight them to the floor. My possessions have flown, they belong to others. My chair, my cupboard, the revolving stool, alone with the shadow I cast. No father, no mother, no brothers, no sisters to swell the house full with laughter. Nothing but loneliness and grief, and the rubble of months, the years bent my back, slow my steps, blind me to the horizon. I miss the smell of coffee, the scent in the air, its absence and ecstasy, where I drown morning and night. Time's out and I'm home alone with the shadow I cast. I miss the company of books, their consolations through trouble and joy. I miss my mother's ancient clock, family photos framed on the wall. I miss my oud for all its silent, severed strings. Time's out and I'm home alone. The curfew hurts. It hurts me. No, it kills me. The killing of children near my home. I'm afraid of tomorrow. I'm afraid of the unknowable resources of fate. Oh God, don't let me be a burden, shunned by young and old. I wait to arrive where the land is silent. I'm waiting for death. Long has been my journey, O God. Make the path short and the journey end. And to close, another poem by Fadwa Tuqan from Abdelatif Labi's Anthology of Palestinian Poetry, in my translation. It is enough for me to die in my country, there to be buried, there to dissolve and disappear, to resuscitate grass on its earth, to resuscitate flower, whose petals a child grew up in my country will pull. It is enough for me to be in my homeland's womb. Earth, grass, flower. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if this one goes high enough. Maybe I'll just do this. Thank you all so much for being here. Wanted to make another plug for this fundraiser for the Balada family. If you don't have the QR code, you can come and speak to me. These kinds of donations to individuals are enormously helpful. My name is Kira Josephson. I am a translator from Swedish. I will be reading a poem that I translated this week for you all by the Swedish-Iranian poet Athena Farrokhzad. But I wanted to start by setting it up with just a brief quote from Isabella Hamad's newish book, Recognizing the Stranger. It's specifically about what she calls the abuse of the idea of anti-Semitism in the West to stifle speech in support of Palestinian rights. And the quote that I wanted to read, the war over words originates in the West's familiarity with the fact that hate speech is the first seemingly innocuous step on the road to genocide. But the West is stuck in a loop, always looking at the past, displaced into language, instead of at the present, communicated in images from which they want to look away. The poem is called Ink is the Strongest Gunpowder. Athena wrote this, I think, in the late teens. And there are just two things that I wanted to set up for you. She mentions Emil Nobel and Alfred Nobel. That is the Nobel of the Nobel Prize. Alfred Nobel was also the inventor of dynamite. She also mentions the yoik of the Samis. The Samis are the indigenous people of Sweden, Finland, and Norway. And yoik is a type of singing that they do. I don't think that they say what she has them say. Ink is the strongest gunpowder. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear when you said that ink is the strongest gunpowder. Perhaps you're a poet or a lieutenant or a former Boy Scout maybe. A student of civil engineering or technical chemistry. You might work extra as a calligrapher or a reseller of laser printers. Maybe you know what you're talking about. You've logged your weapons tests, run comparative surveys, soundtracked the explosions with your typewriter's clatter. You might have studied conjugation to conclude that the positive and the comparative don't quite suffice, that the situation truly does require a superlative. Strong, stronger, strongest. That the tenor and the vehicle are in perfect union. If so, I'm sorry I bothered you. But if not, I have to ask, are you a total fucking idiot? Do you know anything about gunpowder at all? Have you even heard a hand grenade detonate? Have you even seen a combat medic amputate 80 legs in one go? Do you even understand what 75% salpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur can achieve? Did you not read Francis Bacon when he wrote that gunpowder has altered the very face of the world? That no empire, no sect, no star has exerted greater influence than gunpowder? Did you not read about the weapons cache in Wei Yang's imperial palace? How it was watched over by hundreds of guards, all blown to pieces in the 13th century. Don't you think they would have preferred to have their fingers stained by ink? Did you not learn anything from the fate of Emil Nobel, yes, Albert's younger brother, who attempted to make an explosive oil using gunpowder and nitroglycerin? That was the last thing he ever did. Don't you think he would have preferred to lean over his desk and dip a quill in the inkwell? In any case, I've heard that the Samis say that their yoik is the strongest gunpowder. I've heard music critics lament that the pop star didn't bring out her big guns. It seems anyone is free to make up whatever kind of byword they want. Cocaine is the strongest gunpowder, Pablo Escobar's autobiography. Mac OS X is the strongest gunpowder, Steve Jobs' headstone. Jesus is the strongest gunpowder, the most recent issue of the Watchtower. Meat is the strongest gunpowder, Keto Guru gives a lecture. If you find yourself compelled to invent a metaphor, you need to know what forces you're setting in motion. Precision, exactitude, attention, the redemption of rhythm, the straightforwardness of sound, the tension of truth. Be truthful with your language. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. Don't say that a tongue is sharper than a pair of scissors, that love is bloodier than war, that your child's a little dictator and your wife's the boss. Like, seriously, have you ever showed up to a duel armed with a ballpoint pen? Have you ever responded with a sonnet when someone leans in to stab you? Okay, then you're even stupider than I thought. And this thing you've scribbled on your machine, please use your head. The Red Army killed fascists. The partisans killed fascists. The YPG kills fascists. Where you live, not even the anti-fascists kill fascists, and your guitar definitely does not. I assume you've seen Game of Thrones, so you know when Littlefinger is trying to blackmail Cersei, the queen, who's cheating on the king with her own brother. Knowledge is power, says Littlefinger, a threat, at which Cersei orders her guards to seize him. But right as they're about to cut his throat, she has a change of heart, tells them to let him go, take 3 steps back, turn around, and close their eyes. My friend, she says, power is power. That's Foucault one-on-one in less than a minute for you. Go watch the first season and you don't have to read him. Or do go read any of his books. Or just talk to someone who's felt the difference on their bare skin and can tell you that gunpowder is the strongest gunpowder. That the ink in the chamber is something altogether different from the gunpowder in its chamber, which in turn is something altogether different from the president in his chamber, who in turn is someone different entirely from the workers in the factories. The workers rule the chamber. That just doesn't sound right, does it? It's because it's dishonest and dumb and historically deceptive. I don't know if the penny has dropped yet. What I'm trying to say is you need to chill with your words. Economize your superlatives. Keep your powder dry. Thank you. You want it in the stand, yeah? Do you want the mic in the stand?
Hi, I'm Nancy Krikorian, and I'm going to read a short passage from Zabel Yesseyan's In the Ruins, which was a report that she did after the 1909 massacres in Adana, Ottoman Empire. My grandfather was actually a survivor of those massacres, and my grandmother was a survivor of the genocide that happened in 1915, which is 6 years after the smaller one. And it seems reminiscent of what's happening today in Gaza. In the ruined city, in their ruined hearts, oh, I'm sorry, Gary Goshgarian did the translation from the Western Armenian. In the ruined city, in their ruined hearts, everything has been destroyed. In my imagination, I can still see the gesture of a crazed village woman summing up everything that had happened in their village with a sweeping movement of her hand. She repeated mechanically, "If you want to believe it, believe it. If you don't want to, don't. Everything is over. Everything is finished." In this nameless catastrophe, it is not the charred houses or devastated gardens that seem past saving and past reclaiming, nor is it the large numbers of the dead and dying. Rather, it is that crippling inner feeling drifting through everyone's eyes, a feeling of misery, of despondency. It is the feeling of a people that has been trodden underfoot, that has been crushed under the soles of brutes. Heads that, thirsting for light and freedom, had for a moment been lifted in human dignity, have been smashed with ruthless cruelty. Tortured by this thought, I look out at the demolished city, whose heaps of charred rubble take on a different and terrible meaning. And yet, amid this sinister desolation and despair, a smile of hope blooms. In the ruins, a group of women has taken refuge in the shade of the partly demolished walls. Suspended between one wall and another, a cradle is gently rocking. Who knows? What the violence of our grief presents as impossible is perhaps possible after all for the people's untiring, unconscious genius for rebirth. For that wretched child's humble cradle, indifferent to the immense general calamity and quick with an invincible instinct for life, is rocking above this vast cemetery, perfectly indifferent to both the martyred people's abject misery and the criminals' monstrous savagery. And I'm going to read a very short poem by, I'm a mentor in the We Are Not Numbers mentorship program, and I've been working with a very supremely talented young poet named Haya Abu Nasser, who fled Gaza in March and wrote this poem from exile in Malaysia, and it's called A Desperate Bird. A desperate bird, fleeing the roar of tanks, beat its wings in frantic protest. Above the tangled wires at the border, engulfed in a cloud of tears and flames, I stride away, abandoning family, memories, home. I carry fervent longing on my chest as an amulet, which will bring me back someday. I depart like a bird with the eastern wind, losing its feathers away from the nest on a day when the sky wept. O future, I stand at your doorstep, a beggar, wandering from one death to another, pushing my footsteps forward, yet memory never rests and sorrow never sleeps. O mother, life's harshness casts its shadow, and my restless mind is a turbulent sea. Each evening, my whispered plea is a message waiting without an answer. In the ravaged streets of our homeland, drones drown out the sound of your prayers. No lights, no connections, and my unanswered question echoes in the desolate night. Hoping you're well, dear mother. Are you well?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Aya Labanieh, and I'm one of the organizers for this event. And tonight I'll be reading excerpts of my translation of a Mahmoud Darwish poem, because I couldn't help myself, and he's on my arm, titled The Red Indian's Penultimate Speech to the White Man. In it, Darwish transposes the Palestinian tragedy onto the story of the conquest, devastation, and genocide of the indigenous tribes in the New World, in the Americas that we reluctantly inhabit today. He animates the voice of a Native American leader giving an existential speech to the colonizer at his doorstep. The speech straddles the line between the bygone past of the leader's ancestors and the dystopian future he so clearly sees on the horizon. The extermination of his culture, his people, his gods, and everything he has ever known or loved. As you read the poem, you can't help but hear Gaza screaming through it and be reminded that our oppressions are connected in one great history of resistance and grief. All right then, we are who we are on the Mississippi. We have what has been left to us of yesterday. And yet, the color of the sky has changed, and the sea in the east has changed. O master of whites, master of the horse, what do you seek in those who journey to the night trees? Our souls tower high, our pastures are sacred, and the stars are scintillating with speech. Gaze into them, you will read our story entire. We were born here between water and fire. We will be born a second time in the clouds. on the edge of the blue coast after the apocalypse, in a short while. So do not kill the grasses anymore. The grasses have spirits too, fighting within us for the soul of the earth. O master of the horse, teach your horse to repent for the soul of the landscape, for what you have done to our trees. Tree sister, they have brutalized you, as they have brutalized me. Give no absolution to the man who felled your mother and mine. The white man will not understand these ancient words. Here, among the unfettered spirits, between the sky, between the branches, it is the right of free man Columbus to find India in any ocean. Why does he persist in annihilation from beyond his grave to the very end? There is nothing left of us but garnish for the ruins, light feathers on the fabric of the lakes. 70,000 hearts you have ruptured. It will be enough, enough that you will return from our death a king on the throne of a new age. Our names are trees made of God words and birds that soar above the gun. Do not cut the name tree, you migrants from the sea, war-hungry. Do not breathe your stallions like tongues of fire across the plains. You have your God, and we have ours. You have your faith, and we have ours. Do not bury God in these books that promise you a land on our land. You will be lacking, O white ones, the memory of losing the Mediterranean. You will be lacking the eternal solitude, that forest that does not grow on hell's edge. You will be lacking in broken wisdoms, lacking grand defeats in war, lacking the disobedient stone clogging the swift stream of time, lacking 1 hour to meditate upon anything, to evolve inside you the sky that soil needs, lacking 1 hour to hesitate, this path or the next, lacking Euripides, the poetry of Babylon, of Canaan, lacking Solomon's songs to Shulamith, lacking the longing lily, lacking, O white ones, a memory with which to tame the horse of madness, a heart chafing the rocks, varnishing itself on a violin cry. You are lacking a rifle's doubt. If there is no choice but to kill us, spare the creatures that have been our companions. Do not kill our yesterday. You will lack a covenant with our ghosts in the acrid nights of winter, in the embered sun, the unfinished moon. The crime has less fanfare on this cinema screen, so take your sweet time in your great God killing. Thank you.
Is this audible? Hi, I'm Sunila Mubai. Thank you so much, Sophus, for having me, inviting me. I translate from Arabic, and I will read a translation I did along with the original of a poem by Hussein Barghouti, a Palestinian poet and novelist and writer who died in 2002, and he's well known sort of more recently for his sort of novel / autobiography, Daw al-Azraq, The Blue Light, which came out in English recently. He was from Kobar village outside Ramallah, and I'm going to read a poem by him called Salam to Gaza, Salam li Gaza, that he wrote during the First Intifada in 1987. It was never published in his lifetime, but it came out for the first time this year in the Journal of Palestine Studies after a recording of it by him on a cassette tape was recovered by his cousin Muhib, who is also a poet. Reading and rereading this poem, one can understand why, kind of, in a sense, he wanted it as a recording, because the poem is quite liturgical and hymn-like, not in a religious sense, but the word salam, which is kind of a religious refrain throughout the poem. Also because it's one of these words that has traveled far and wide and is used in many connotations depending. It can mean hello, it can mean, to wish someone health, it can mean safety, peace, etc., etc. And in this poem, Barghouti seems to be wishing peace both upon Gaza, but also saluting, giving a salute to the Gazan people's courage and resilience during the first Intifada in confronting the occupier. So I have a request from the audience. Every time I say the word salam, please repeat salam after me. I will read it by stanza in English, my translation, and then the Arabic. Okay. Salam to Gaza. My sister will live without me. My family will live without me. Part of me will live without me. The whole of me will live without me. Salam to those holding out in prison. My heart goes out to those who died inside, a sparrow's peck to those who remain. Peace be upon a stone, blue like ocean waves, like the sky, like mountain goats' eyes, like flights of pigeons. Peace be upon that stone, peace be upon it, upon it, upon it. Right now are the dreams of a land, hopes of a nation. Peace be upon a stone encircled by flowers that girls' eyes reach out to embrace. Salam li Gaza. ستبقى بدون أختي ويبقى بدون أهلي ويبقى بدون جزئي ويبقى بدون كلي. سلام لمن يصبر الآن في السجن وقلبي على من مات فيه وقبلة عصفور لمن يتبقى. سلام على حجر مثل موج البحر أزرق مثل السماء مثل عيون الوعول وأسراب الحمام. عليه السلام عليه السلام عليه السلام عليه الآن. أحلام أرض وآمال أمة. سلام على حجر حوله ضمة من الزهور فإن عيون الصبايا تحاول ضمه. Salam to Gaza. The refugee camp lacks bread now, but it is enriched with blood. The camp lacks land and bread, but now it ascends to the skies. Salam to Gaza's doves. Where they flutter, they brush at my heart and drink of my water. To honor those who remain, silence outdoes words. Salamun li Gaza. فقر المخيم للخبز لكنه يغتني الآن بالدماء. فقر المخيم للأرض والخبز لكنه الآن يصعد للسماء. سلام لكل حمائم غزة حيث ترف تلامس قلبي وتشرب مائي. وأعز من الكلام الصمت إجلالا لمن يتبقى. Salam to a pair of eyelashes on a boy's face. Rafah eyelashes, wet with roses and tears. Salam to those offering their bodies to coffin bearers. And a sparrow's peck to those who remain. What can I offer to the cemetery? The road into it is the very road we take to depart it like gods. The massacring hand cannot overpower the torrents of life. The streets, like the sparrows, stand still. They drink from rain whose free drops come from clouds floating free in a free sky. Salam to those trees. Their cry rings louder than my song. سلام لرمشين مبتلين بالدمع والورد في وجه طفل رفحي الرموش. سلام لمن قدموا جسمهم للنعوش وقبلة عصفور لمن يتبقى. ماذا أقدم للمقبرة؟ إن الطريق إليها طريق لنخرج منها خروج الإله. ليست يد التذبيح أقوى من سيول الحياة. إن الشوارع مثل العصافير واقفة تشرب الآن من مطر حر النقاط وحر الغيوم وحر السماء. سلام لهذا الشجر فهو أطول من غنائي. Thank you. And I'll just read one other very short poem by the Syrian poet Riyad Saleh al-Hussein, who was born in 1954 and lived a very short, tragic life, died in 1982. He was deaf most of his life and suffered from kidney failure and diabetes and lived mostly quite poor, working various menial jobs, not very well recognized during his time. But his poetry stands witness to the massacres and barbaric violence of the Assad regime, which also touched many, many Palestinians, and it kind of foresaw the devastation in Syria and then in Palestine today, and it became kind of a cult hero after the revolution in 2012. So it's just a very short piece. I'll read it in Arabic first and then in English. حياتنا الجميلة. الحياة حلوة يقول العصفور ويرتمي ميتا قرب حذاء الصياد. الحياة حلوة تقول الوردة وترتمي ميتة في يد الولد الوسيم. الحياة حلوة يقول ويطلق على رأسه النار. الحياة قبيحة كريهة فاسدة شريرة يقول الطاغية ويقدم قطعة من البسكويت. Our beautiful life. Life is beautiful, says the sparrow, and drops dead beside the hunter's shoe. Life is beautiful, says the rose, and drops dead in the handsome boy's palm. Life is beautiful, he says, and shoots himself in the head. Life is ugly, despicable, corrupt, evil, says the tyrant, and takes a bite out of a biscuit. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nicole Peyrafit. Thank you very much for having me tonight. And I'm going to start with a piece of mine that I wrote on the same topic of resistance for the women of Iran. And then I have two poems by Palestinian writers. So the first is from October 2022, when there was the rebellion in Iran. And it was a piece that was part of a performance. The writing is part of a performance where I did an action painting. And that was actually published in Iran. And this hymn is dedicated, to the women of Iran fighting for their freedom of choice and to all the men who supported them. And this piece is very loosely based on an hymn of Inanna attributed to Enheduanna. So we have the grand expert on Enheduanna here, so I just want to say it's very loosely based. And Sophie wrote actually the book on Enheduanna that you all must read. So, ho, 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 women of Iran. Ho, 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 women of Iran. Antediluvian women fighting for your rights inscribed in the maize. Your influence is mighty. Your roaring makes the world tremble. Your courage rings around the earth. Your persistence is formidable. All of you, Enheduannas, all of you, high priestess of freedom, I deeply admire you. You exercise full ladyship over heaven and earth. Let me praise your ways. Let me praise your greatness. Let me call on Inanna, goddess of heaven and earth, to power your quest. May a whirlwind of freedom be the only mandatory garment on your hair. Don't be tired, sister. Katesh Navashid Messi. And then I will read a poem by Mahmoud Darwish, Things of Others, translation by Mohammed Shaheen. And Pierre and I visited the grave of Mohammed Darwish in 2015. That's an amazing place in Ramallah. Think of others. As you prepare your breakfast, think of others. Do not forget the pigeons' food. As you conduct your wars, think of others. Do not forget those who seek peace. As you pay your water bill, think of others, those who are nursed by clouds. As you return home to your home, think of others. Do not forget the people of the camps. As you sleep and count the stars, think of others, those who have nowhere to sleep. As you liberate yourself in metaphor, think of others, those who have lost the right to speak. As you think of others far away, think of yourself. Say, if only I were a candle in the dark. And I'm going to close with a poet by Khaled Juma, a poet from 2014. And I couldn't find who is the translator. This poem got viral. I mean, you can find it everywhere, and nowhere I can find the name of a translator. It's called, maybe you have seen it, Oh, Rascal, Children of Gaza. And this man, Khaled Juma, what the information I found was, if anybody has more information, please tell me. He was raised in Al Shabura, Palestinian refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. And he worked for the Department of Palestine News at some point. And he was the editor-in-chief of Hoya magazine for 7 years. And he had many publications of poetry, prose, poetry, short story, TV, songs. So anyway, it's called Oh, Rascal, Children of Gaza. Oh, rascal children of Gaza, who constantly disturbed me with your screams under my window. You who filled every morning with Russian cows. You who broke my vase and stole the lonely flower on my balcony. Come back, come back, and scream as you want, and break all the vases, steal all the flowers. Come back, just come back. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? My name's Emma Ramadan, and I translate from French, but instead of reading something that I translated, I'm hoping to just read some. I wanted to talk about my relationship to translation and to Lebanon and my father. My father never told me I was an Arab. After growing up in the mountains outside of Beirut, he left Lebanon near the start of the country's civil war in 1975, selling off the remaining stock of electronics from my grandfather's warehouse for cash that my grandmother would stuff in her bra and bring onto the plane. He eventually settled in Southern California with his parents and his 2 brothers, where I was born. I grew up spending Sundays with my cousins at my teta and Jiddu's house, eating a magical dish we simply referred to as riz. No one spoke Arabic to us, the younger generation. No one spoke to us of Lebanon or showed us photos of their homeland or taught us even just a few phrases to say to our Lebanese grandparents who knew almost no English and could only say, Habibti, how are you, as we walked through their door, quickly reverting to silent nods and smiles. Our fathers never told us what it meant to be an Arab, and so my cousins and I came to our own definition. The cases of caffeine-free Diet Coke, those gold cans that don't exist anymore, sitting in our grandparents' pantry was so Arab. The string of words we couldn't understand with the occasional English word such as penny loafer thrown in was so Arab. Because our fathers always listened to the Spanish language group, the Gypsy Kings, that too came to be associated somewhat bafflingly with our definition of what it was to be an Arab. But even with these loose definitions gleaned from our fathers' shared habits, we never came to associate ourselves with these traits, merely observing them from the outside, almost comically, as something other. My father never told me I was an Arab. It was a boy in my 5th grade class who would eventually make me aware of this fact when a few days after 9/11, he informed the rest of my class that I might bomb the school. This was the first time someone told me, "You are an Arab," and then offered me a definition of that word. I understand now that this is precisely why none of our fathers taught us Arabic or took us to Lebanon or spoke to us about this part of ourselves. Why they too began to detach and dissociate from who they really were after moving to America and trying to assimilate here. Why, when I finally went to Lebanon in 2019, it was met with confusion and almost no interest by the members of my extended family. And why, when I informed my uncles just a few months ago that I'm now learning Arabic, their response was simply, "For what reason?" And so as it became more and more important to me to understand what it means to be an Arab, when I couldn't turn to family or to anything in America to offer me an answer, I turned to books, specifically books written in other languages, in French or Arabic. And when I began translating the works of Lebanese writer Lamia Ziadeh, I felt I was sewing back together something that had been left to fall apart many years ago, before I was born. As I translated her travelogue through southern Lebanon in her book called My Great Arab Melancholy, I was able to imagine myself there and made myself an itinerary of all the places I would go on my next trip to Lebanon with my father. For example, what she describes in her book as a sunlit cemetery that slopes gently towards the sea at the tip of Tyre, between 2 fields of ancient ruins. A cemetery where fig trees, laurel trees, pomegranate trees, palm trees, reeds, Roman columns, and capitals grow in anarchy. There, the tombs of martyrs fallen in combat or of entire families mowed down in Israeli bombings bloom. It's a paradisical cemetery, gay, joyous, wrapped in ribbons. Her book introduced me to these parts of Lebanon I hadn't had access to before, and I believed that if I could visit these places, I would start to know what it really meant to be an Arab. Her words were a stepping stone for me. But in the last year, rather than an introduction to or account of the Lebanese South, her book transformed into something else: preservation, an archive of what is now or may soon be ruins. Her book is my tether, my way to travel through these specific places. But rather than a catalog of the beauty of my father's country, it is becoming a catalog of what used to be. And I fear that more and more this is what the role of translation from this region has or might become: to preserve in written form what is being destroyed before our very eyes in Palestine and Lebanon, to remember the beauty and the life that once existed there, and above all, who it belongs to. And I'd like to end by reading an excerpt from Your Name, Palestine by Olivia Elias, a French-Palestinian poet, translated by Jérémy Robert and Sarah Riggs, and published by World Poetry Books last year. Musicians, listen. I must start there. Confirm this reality. I was born at this latitude and this longitude: 36 degrees, 48 minutes, 46 seconds north, 35 degrees, 0 minutes, 8 seconds east, 548 meters above sea level. To be precise, because everything else has moved: my country, my place, and my house, my country that is no longer my country, my place that is no longer my place, my house that is no longer mine. At this latitude and at this longitude, they tried to change the order of time, break the harmony of the world, sweep roads and borders aside, force the earth to tell a different story. They may well turn the soil, sack the ancient mosaics. Each rock layer remembers we were here. The stones weep and count the days that separate them from our return. Palestine, when they hear your name, crowds rise and sing your odyssey. Engulfed, you become eternal. Forbidden, your voice resonates stronger still, and the more you suffer, the more we believe in your victory. I say that the triumph of love is hope. I say your name, Palestine, like the supreme mantra of liberation, and I take flight from the depths of my prison. Musicians, can you hear this vibration spreading on every continent? Thank you.
Think that you do it like this? I have a good role model in you, Kira. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob Rogers. Everyone can hear me okay, I assume? Okay. I translate from Galician, which is sort of stateless language in northwest Spain. But first, I wanted to very briefly read a poem by the Palestinian poet Ahmad al-Mala, who I think lives in Philly, from his book Border Wisdom, which came out last year, and I would highly recommend everyone seek out and read. It's a really brilliant book. May I interrupt with a side note here? To the edification of our dear and kind readers in the developing and advanced worlds, I promise. You see, that's how Palestinians lose their battles. Their suffering is so detailed and absurd that when they try to tell it to the world, they step into a critical defeat, the overdramatic. Ah, well, here I go, stepping into the overdramatic and talking about myself in the third person. There goes nothing, as the idiot idiom would have it. I was skipping ahead. Let's get back to the business of translation. Yes, there's something about those sites, the ruins, everything turning to sand. It must be deserted, like this time that wants to contain and flatten. You know. The possible, impossible, and that nonsense about dichotomy, etc. Note to self, I do not understand this tone, this constant fishing for irony. Isn't it exhausting? What you're deflecting is your own emotions, just a few sentences like the ones you have in Arabic. They say the wrong metaphor for exile is a broken heart, and it should be more like two hearts. Could it be two broken ones? Just like language, because when the heart stops pumping the pool of blood to the head, one loses the ability to speak. Biology takes its toll on the language. Just give me a few days to be immersed completely in everything Arabic, and I'll start spitting words like broken teeth. And now I just want to, so I'm going to be reading a very short portion from a novel that I just finished translating by the writer Bryce Lamela, which doesn't speak directly to Palestine, but is very invested in displacement and land and home and dispossession by the state, specifically about this is sort of a true story, although it is a novel. A group of people in the rural mountains who were displaced by the Franco regime when they built a reservoir that literally flooded. Their homes were left underwater, and the ones that weren't were completely disconnected from the world. And in this passage, the narrator, who grew up in the place where these people were displaced to, is with his father, who has a neurodegenerative disease, but has sort of created this workshop. But I kind of thought about reading this because I just saw the documentary No Other Land, which is a Palestinian documentary, which I would also recommend. It's basically about the villagers in Masafer Yatta who are resisting the occupation in the West Bank. But it was just, there's so many scenes of, it'll be a little girl playing on a swing that they've just sort of fashioned under a tarp out of like wires, or rebuilding their school overnight. And I just found that ability to imagine and recreate your world every day in the face of barbarity, it's like an earned optimism, which I think this book shares, so I'll just get into it. Before we stop in Outeiro, we decide to make one last detour to Arneiro, a few kilometers down the road. I haven't gotten around to visiting the old town since last summer when I interviewed the people who'd been forced here. As we drive by, I'm surprised to find the landscape completely transformed, acre upon acre in covered in greenhouses, as far as the eye can see, occupied by the greenhouses of a foreign company that specializes in intensive berry production. The sprinkler irrigation system imposed during the Franco regime has served the multinational company well, and it now uses up water at a whim, without oversight. My brother comments that now there's a new round of displaced people coming to the Terracha, here to gather delicate strawberries and raspberries with their calloused hands. Seasonal immigrants from Romania or Morocco who occupy cramped, miserable rooms in the center of Castro del Rey for a couple months and are bussed in for work every day by the company. We turned down a side road to the back of the house. I helped my brother take out my father's heavy electric wheelchair. We set it on the gravel beside the car door so that he can maneuver into it more easily. Mariana looks at the gardens full of rotting fruit. So this is the house where you grew up, she asks. Yes, I say, this is the house where I grew up. But it's not true. In reality, I grew up here and there. Here when my father worked at the bar, there when he opened the furniture store, and here again when he had to close the furniture store and reopen the bar. Well, I correct myself, I guess it's more like I grew up in transit, between here and there. I take in the signs of abandonment, the moss growing between the bits of gravel, the unused appliances waiting to be taken to the green drop-off. This is not my childhood home. This is my childhood home. Don't you work in a museum? My father asks Mariana. She smiles at him. He navigates his wheelchair to the garage door where he improvised his workshop after he got sick. That's where he spends his afternoons creating. Sometimes the neighbors pass his workshop and say, how nice that he's keeping busy, or maybe, at least he's found a way to pass the time. But really, my father doesn't create to pass the time or distract himself. He does it to get lost inside himself, to stretch time further, to make worlds beyond this one, worlds of his own. He gestures for me to open the garage door and flip the power switch. Music starts to play on a radio. He engineered it so that the radio would turn on with the lights, and is as amused as a little boy when visitors flip the switch and marvel at the music coming on as the space fills with a dim yellow light. Here is his world, boundlessly heterogeneous, impure, baroque. A cow's drinking trough turned into a living room lamp, a double roof made out of the green glass of old wine bottles, decrepit tractor seats that look like avant-garde armchairs, an installation with empty paint cans that take on the form of an industrial rainbow. His workshop brings to life everything he's gathered, all this junk he's found by maneuvering his wheelchair around scrapyards and abandoned cattle ranches, as well as the items from his furniture store that no one wanted to buy, the preposterously tall chairs, the dolls with bulging eyes, the curved benches that look like cells, too outlandish for the average customer. Mariana contemplates his work with curiosity, still unsure of the reaction he's hoping for, because his objects don't hide their origins, the world they came from. Each of these pieces is a map of an uninhabited world, the tools he found on empty farmlands, the junk abandoned at his bar. I love it, Mariana says. It could be featured in an exhibition in New York. My father laughs, though with his throat paralysis, the laughter sounds rough, like a croak. I walk out of the workshop with Mariana. I want to show her the things from my childhood, the treehouse my father built when I was little, the black silo rolls I would climb on top of, pretending I was an astronaut orbiting dark matter. But of course, the silo rolls aren't here anymore. The ameshidas have died off, sibling by sibling, and now there's no one left to store the dry hay. The treehouse, too, has rotted after innumerable rains, drizzles, mists. Mariana, I say, did you know that Galician has more words for rain than any other language? This is true. It's like 40 or 50. It's a nightmare. I'm afraid to climb the ladder my father built in case the lichen-covered rings split. I think back to the architect's lecture on forensic architecture. If the displaced could return to their childhood homes, he'd said, if they could go back to that privileged place, they could restore their existence, their life story, or something like that. But my memories don't come back to me, or rather they come back to me loosely, in discontinuous strips, flashes that fade as quickly as they come. Maybe because rather than leaving one day and never coming back, I've spent my entire life coming and going, so that returning to this house isn't exactly a whole restoration. It's more like leaving a fresh layer of sediment, like a river that never stops flowing. It's nearly dark out. The first stars appear in the sky, blue and tremulous, fragile as fireflies. I look back at the house and see my father driving his electric wheelchair along the roadside. He bends over to pick up something in the gravel. He calls for me to come to him. Is this where I grew up? It's cool in the garage. My father has written something in his notebook. Can you help me put this cable here? Thanks. He's making something with the tangle of tubes he found in Ernest, appropriating the relics of an appropriation. I take the cable and try to insert it where he's asked me to, but I do it wrong, so he explains patiently that that's not the right way, that I have to insert it in a different spot. He writes another message I can't read, so he gestures to explain where the spot is, and I insert the cable where he says. And then my father smiles, and I realize we're making something, a lamp. But already he's looking for something else for me to do. Already he wants me to help him continue some other unfinished task, to keep on making things out of what remains. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Yasmin Seal, and I'm just going to read very briefly from the book I've been translating from Arabic. It's called Tawq al-Hamama, or The Ring of the Dove. It was written almost exactly 1,000 years ago in Andalusia by a young man, as he was then, called Ibn Hazm. It's a book all about love, but Ibn Hazm was writing in the middle of a civil war that had destroyed the great city of Cordoba, where he had grown up, and which really tore through the fabric of the society that he had known and loved. He manages to escape Cordoba and goes into exile to another city near Valencia, having lost most of his family and most of his friends. And there he writes this book, which is on the surface a book about young people in Cordoba having crushes. But then you realize that all the people he's talking about have been killed and the places he's describing have been destroyed. And so this book is really an attempt to remember Cordoba as it was, which was really one of the most spectacularly creative places that has ever been. And it was impossible working on this translation in the last year not to think of all the places that have been and are being destroyed, and all the people, the writers, the journalists, the witnesses who have been killed and whose testimony we will not have, because the Ring of the Dove is an extraordinary book because so little of Cordoba has remained. We have very little in the material record. I went to see an exhibition this morning in New York promising to bring to life medieval Cordoba, and there's almost nothing. A few broken capitals and a few coins and pots. And really what we know about Cordoba, we know through writing, the writing that has survived, including this book. So this is just one poem. It's a love poem. The Ring of the Dove is a wonderful collage of genres. It's part philosophy, part autobiography, and it's also full of Ibn Hazm's own poems, love poems that seem to be addressed to both men and women. I love it when in talk his name comes up, like smelling amber suddenly. And if he speaks, I stop listening to those beside me, occupied with looking only at him, laughing, flirting. And if I had with me even the caliph, I would not change course. And if I was forced to go, it would be often turning and stumbling as if wounded, and with eyes fixed on him, even as my body pulled away, like when a person drowning turns to face the shore, and I go down remembering how far he is, like someone caught in soft, wet ground or fire and slowly dying. And if you ask if there is hope for heaven, there is, and I know the way up. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Luke Susi. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me, especially because I translate Latin, which means tonight you all get to think about the Roman Empire. This is a passage that has to do with the conquest of a set of indigenous peoples in what was, to the Romans, an unfathomably uncivilized and semi-mythical land called Britain. It comes from the historian Tacitus in his biography of the general Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who happened to be his father-in-law. And it tells how Agricola led a campaign to expand imperial control into modern-day Scotland. This passage is notable for being one of the only times a Roman writer seriously tries to capture the experience of empire from the other side. And it is set in the year 83. Early that summer, Agricola suffered a private blow losing the son who had been born the year before. He took this tragedy not with the show of a bravado, the way that many men do, nor even with a woman's grief and tears, but instead found one means to soothe his sorrow lay in making war. So, sending the fleet ahead to pillage various regions and spread the fog of terror far and wide, he advanced with an expeditionary force as far as the Grampian Mountains, which the enemy had occupied already, reinforced by the bravest Britons he commanded, men whose loyalty had been proved through years of peace. For the Britons, unbowed by their rout in the last conflict, had foreseen for themselves two fates: to be enslaved or to resist, and the rest, learning at last that only when united could they defeat the danger they shared, had used embassies and treaties to muster together the forces of all their people. Among their many leaders, one stood out for his nobility and strength of character. His name was Calgacus, and before that great crowd gathered round him clamoring for the fight, he is said to have spoken these words this way: "Every time I consider the causes of this war and our current dire position, my spirit soar that this very day and your singleness of mind spell what shall be the birth of freedom throughout the whole of Britain. For you are gathered here, now united, still free, on a strip where the land runs out, and the sea itself is no longer safe with the Roman fleet looming our way. For us on the land's edge, the furthest reaches of freedom, our sheer remoteness was a while a defense. But now they have thrown the country's borders open, and there is always a lure to what's beyond. But there are no peoples left beyond us, nothing but ocean and stones, and the encroaching Romans from whose arrogant power no obedience or submission affords escape. They are looting the world. And since their plunderings depleted the land, they are making a push to the sea. If their foes are rich, they are greedy for gold. If poor, then for conquest alone. Nothing they've drained to the east or the west has quenched them, who, strangest of all, covet the holdings of haves and have-nots with the same equal drive. To pillage, slaughter, and rape they misname governance, and where they make desolation, they call it peace. It is nature's law that each person hold dearest their own children and relations. Ours are torn from us and enrolled in bondage in lands we cannot reach. Even when our wives and sisters escape the enemy's lust, they are violated by the same men who till now posed as our hosts and friends. Our goods and fortunes are crushed into tribute, our fields and harvests into their granaries, our very life and limb in building their roads through forest and swampland, amid cursing and the lash. Those born into the shackles of bondage, sold once and for all, are fed by their masters. But our land is every day paying the price of its own enslavement and feeding its enslavers every day. Whether our people is to bear this forever or see it ended is the matter at stake here. So spare a thought as you're marching forward for your ancestors, of course, and also for your children. That sentence, "They make a desolation and call it peace," is probably the most famous line written by a Roman historian. As it happened, the Romans never did manage to pacify Britain. It was the province that never fully assimilated, the one on which they could never really turn their backs. And in the end, the imperial regime cut its losses and decided on a strategy of segregation and territorial confinement, with a structure whose ruins you can now visit as Hadrian's Wall. The last few speakers, I think we've all been talking a bit about ruins and what it means to have relics and symbols of the past. And so very quickly, to end on a different note, I too would like to read from Najwan Darwish, also from the Abu Zaid translation, a very short poem called The Obelisk. When the greatest singer of her time visited Paris to give a concert in solidarity with her country, which had just emerged from a crushing defeat, she agreed to a single TV interview. Her payment for the concert, which she donated to the war efforts, was rumored to be the highest sum ever paid to a singer in those days. And when the interviewer asked her what most caught her eye in the City of Lights, as they called it, Kulthum flashed an enchanting smile and replied, "The Egyptian obelisk." The Egyptian villager inside her was greater than any city, and greater than any poet is the worker now smiling within me, enraptured by this praise of his ancestors, the ones that hewed that obelisk. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We should really have done this in order of height rather than alphabetically. I would still be last. Thank you all for being here and for your support of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. If you're able to, please consider also making a donation to the Balata family. I'm Jeremy Tiang. I'm a writer and translator from Chinese. I will be reading two short pieces. The first is my translation of a poem by the Singaporean writer and revolutionary Hai Fan, who is a member of the Malayan Communist Party. The Malayan Communist insurrection was at its heart an anti-imperialist movement. And in support of this cause, Hai Fan spent 13 years in the 1970s and 80s fighting in the rainforests of Malaysia and Thailand. This is from his book, What the Rainforest Told You. The poem was written in 1988, shortly before the peace treaty that allowed him to leave the rainforest. The gorilla is mysterious. The gorilla is a riddle. No one knows where he came from. Who can say where he has gone? He may have died more than once. Each person is a page of wonders, a passing glimpse in battle. No regret for a youth spent imprisoned. The wind-tossed waves of the South Pacific are a hero's farewell. All these wise, strong people, what can have so enraptured them that they leave their families and abandon themselves, disappearing like a bird towards the wilderness, not to hide themselves, but plunging into gunfire, perhaps one-legged, perhaps one-eyed, lost in the many years of battle? Who could have thought your shoulders, just 2 feet wide, could bear the weight of a half-century of storms? The second piece is by the Singaporean writer and Dr. Ang Swee Chai, who's the founder of the charity Medical Aid for Palestinians. This is from her memoir, From Beirut to Jerusalem. May 1989 was an abnormal month for me. Israel was celebrating its Foundation Day and placed the whole of Gaza under military curfew. I was out in Jerusalem to buy medical supplies and, as a UN official, was exempted from the curfew. As I drove through, I saw how Israel was decked out in blue and white flags, and preparations for celebrations were well in advance. There was an atmosphere of gaiety in Israel, but as I advanced back into Gaza, my heart was heavy. Gaza had remained silent, like a ghost town. There was a curfew. No music was allowed. No one was allowed out of their homes. My ambulance was the only one moving object as I drove through Gaza City. It was eerie. I remember only too vividly the 6th of May, 1989, a day of blood. It was Eid, the ending of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, and it was usually a time when everyone broke their fast, visiting each other's homes, showering gifts and offering well wishes. But as worshippers emerged from their mosques, Israeli helicopters appeared and started firing live rounds at them. Children and young men angrily responded by stoning the ground Israeli soldiers. They responded by shooting back. In that few minutes, 343 injured Palestinians were brought into our tiny hospital, and 6 of them died while awaiting treatment. We operated on the wounded all day and throughout the night and into the next morning. As I emerged at dawn, I was told to go off for a shower and have something to eat. It was then that I had a distinct sense of déjà vu. At 7 a.m., 18th September 1982, years before, I was ordered out of the basement operating theater of Gaza Hospital in Beirut's Shatila camp. I walked into the bright sunlight and learned the truth and scale of what had happened over the previous 3 days. I was a witness and survivor of the Sabra Shatila massacre. But on that May morning, something was different. As I left the hospital operating theater that morning, the tree in the hospital courtyard greeted my eyes. Overnight, it had put out pink blossoms. Against the bright May sky, it looked bizarre and beautiful. When I reached my quarters on top of the hospital pharmacy, I knelt down and burst out into sobs. Memories of that earlier massacre in Beirut and what I had experienced the night before in Gaza and my 6 months there overwhelmed me. The tear gas and the shootings, the sheer humiliation forced upon families, the open cesspools, the realities of life under occupation. God, are you still there? I asked. But then I looked out of my window. The tree in full blossom seemed to tell me that he had not forgotten. Spring was in Gaza, as beautiful as it always was. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Maldonado. Before we close, those who donated at the entrance, I will make sure that that money makes it to the Balata family. Also, my hands can serve as a, what do you call it? Collection basket, and I will forward it to them as well. I have to close with a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. Shoulders. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. His ears fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We are not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling. Thank you for coming.
عينون ترابات العيون نامت لكن صاحي قلبه ما بينام. يا رايح صوب بلادي دخلك وصل السلام بلغ اهلي وولادي مشتاق له درب الحمام سلي امي يا منادي بعدها ممنوع الاحلام والايام ببالي والله بتعد الايام. ويا رايح صوبك فرمتة دخلك وصل السلام وبلغ غيماتك فرمتة واصل لرب الحمام. ويا رايح صوبك فرمتة دخلك وصل السلام بلغ غيماتك فرمتة واصل لرب الحمام. وإلا عندي بنت صغيرة عالتلي نسيت شالها عن أهلها سألتها وعن بيتك تحكي وما بتعرف حالها. يا بضاعة وصلت لك فرمتها غنونا شوي تنام. يا رايح صوب بلادي دخلك وصل السلام بلغ أهلي وولادي مشتاق له رب الحمام سلي امي يا منادي بعدها ممنوع الاحلام والا ايامها ببالي والله بتعز الايام. ويا رايح صوب المنار فتش لي عن حرش العيد وبالعالي طير طياره اللي وانصار الارميد. ويا رايح صوب المنار فتش لي عن حرش العيد وبالعالي طير طياره اللي وانصار الارميد. ونادي كان في عنا ساحه نلعب فيها من زمان ونادي كانت حول بيوتهم حلوة اشجار الرمان قطعوها وبقيت وحدي يسقوها شوي. يا رايح صوب بلادي دخلك وصل السلام بلغ اهلي وولادي مشتاق له رب الحمام خلي امي النادي بعدها ممنوع الاحلام والا ايامها ببالي والله بتعز الايام الا ايامها ببالي والله بتعز أسرار السنون عادت إلى الشبابيك العتيقة. رايان الطلال عادوا إلى البيوت المطمئنة. أسرار السنون عادت إلى الشبابيك العتيقة. رايان الطلال عادوا إلى البيوت المطمئنة. وآبت اليمائم إلى الأعشاش الجبلية. عطرانا نرجع مثل سنون مثل راع جبلي مثل شراع عابد. عطرانا نرجع 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 سنرجع يوما إلى حي ونغرق في دافئة المنى. سنرجع مهما يمر الزمان وتنهى المسافات ما بيننا. فيا قلب مهل ولا ترتمي على درب عودتنا. فيا قلب مهل ولا ترتمي على درب عودتنا. يعز علينا غدا أن تعود رفوف الطيور ونحن هنا. سنرجع خبرني العندلي غداة التقينا على منحنى سنرجع خبرني العندلي غداة التقينا على منحنى سنرجع خبرني العندلي غداة التقينا على منحنى بأن البنابل لما تزل هناك تعيش بأشعارنا وما زال بين طلال الحنين وناس الحنين مكان لنا فيا قلب كم شردتنا رياح سنرجع